At exactly 3:03 a.m., every phone in the town rang at the same time. The caller ID showed only one word: Mom. The problem? Everyone's mother had been dead for years. Still, thousands of people answered. By sunrise, not a single one of them was ever seen again. Story. So, let's start from the beginning. The small town of Black Hollow had one strange rule. If your phone rings at exactly 3:03 a.m., never answer it. Nobody knew who started the rule, and nobody wanted to find out. One rainy night, 17-year-old Ethan Carter stayed awake playing video games. At exactly 3:03 a.m., his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Mom. His mother had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. His hands began to shake. Before he could answer, a voicemail appeared. Even though he had never picked up the call, he pressed play. Static filled the speaker. Then a familiar voice whispered, Ethan, sweetheart, I'm cold. Come find me. The message ended with something that didn't belong. A little girl laughing. The next night, the phone rang again. It was 3:03 a.m. Same caller. Mom. This time, Ethan answered. Mom? Silence for nearly 10 seconds, then a whisper. I'm not alone. The line went dead. From that night on, everything inside Ethan's house began to change. Every morning, the kitchen chairs faced the hallway. The television switched itself on, showing nothing but black and white static. Every clock inside the house stopped at 3:03, and whispers started. At first, they sounded like wind, until Ethan realized they were repeating the same sentence. Answer again. Thinking someone was playing a prank, Ethan installed security cameras throughout the house. At exactly 3:03 a.m., every camera froze for 33 seconds. When the footage returned, every door in the house was standing open. Even Ethan's dog sensed something was wrong. It barked into an empty hallway, then backed into a corner, trembling and refusing to come out. When Ethan told his grandmother about the calls, she didn't laugh. Instead, she led him into the attic and opened a dusty wooden box. Inside was an old photograph showing Ethan's mother as a child standing outside an orphanage. But upstairs, behind one of the windows, another little girl stared directly into the camera. Searching through old town records, Ethan uncovered a forgotten tragedy. 50 years earlier, an orphanage had burned down at exactly 3:03 a.m. None of the children's bodies were ever found. That night, the phone never rang. Instead, someone knocked on the front door. Ethan looked through the peephole and saw his mother standing outside in the rain, smiling and asking to be let in. Then he noticed something terrifying. She wasn't wearing the necklace she had been buried with. Certain the phone was cursed, Ethan smashed it with a hammer, burned every piece, and buried the remains deep in the woods. That night, he finally fell asleep. At exactly 3:03 a.m., a ringtone echoed from inside his closet. Sitting on the floor was an old rotary phone that had never been there before. The receiver slowly lifted by itself, and a voice whispered, "We found you." The next morning, Ethan was gone. There were no signs of a struggle. Only the old phone remained. When a police officer picked it up, it began to ring. The caller ID displayed one word: Mom. If your phone ever rings at exactly 3:03 a.m., don't answer. Michael Carter was 28 years old, married to his wife Emma, and they had a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. After years of saving money, they finally bought their dream home in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Oregon. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a peaceful place where Lily could grow up, and where the family could leave their stressful city life behind. The neighbors seemed friendly, the streets were silent, and everything felt perfect. But within a few days of moving in, Michael noticed something about the old house across the street, something that no one else seemed willing to talk about. Every single night at exactly 10:17 p.m., an old man would appear behind the upstairs window of the abandoned house. He never waved, he never moved. He simply stood there in complete silence, staring out into the darkness. At first, Michael assumed the man was just lonely. Weeks passed, but the routine never changed. Every night, at exactly 10:17 p.m., the figure appeared in the same window, wearing the same gray sweater and standing in the exact same position. One rainy evening, Michael finally decided to introduce himself. He walked across the street and knocked on the front door. No one answered. The porch was covered in dust, and old newspapers were piled against the entrance as if nobody had touched them in years. Confused, Michael asked another neighbor about the house. The woman's face immediately changed. She quietly said, "Didn't anyone tell you? The man who lived there, Mr. Carter, died almost 10 years ago. No one has lived in that house since." Michael laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a joke. But that night, at exactly 10:17 p.m., he looked out his bedroom window, and the old man was there again. This time, something was different. Instead of staring into the street, he was staring directly at Michael. The old man's pale face slowly stretched into an unnatural smile. Then, without taking his eyes off Michael, he slowly raised one hand and pointed toward Michael's front door. A loud knock echoed through the house. 3 slow knocks. Michael froze. He looked through the peephole. No one was there. When he turned back toward the window across the street, the old man had disappeared. The next morning, Michael opened his front door. On the welcome mat lay a faded black and white photograph. It showed the house across the street. Standing in the upstairs window was the same old man. Standing beside him was Michael. The photograph was dated 3 days in the future. Michael and his family packed their belongings and left the neighborhood that very afternoon. But the people who still live there say that every night, at exactly 10:17 p.m., there are now 2 people standing silently behind the upstairs window.